Please welcome Senator Mike Lee.
One of the things that I think it's important for us to talk about for a few minutes, since you're young people, and since you're young people affiliated with the Eagle Forum, an organization that is near and dear to my heart, that I have great respect for, is the fact that there is an interesting set of things that you're told as young people who happen to be conservatives. One thing that you're often told as young people is that the future is in your hands. The future is up to you. You are our future leaders. I urge you to resist thinking about it like this. It may be true that you'll be around longer than the rest of us, and therefore the future is yours in that respect. But insofar as we concede that the future is yours, and by thereby concluding we also suggest that the present is not yours, that does you and us a disservice. I'd encourage you to live in the present, keeping in mind the fact that you're all old enough now to make a difference in our society, to make a difference in how our government operates. Don't wait for the future, for you to seize your rightful place in America, and for you to take the opportunity to assert that which is rightfully yours. As people associated with the Eagle Forum, I'd also encourage you to reject some common narratives, one of which says that there is some kind of tension between various elements of the conservative movement, that somehow there might be a conflict between social conservatism on the one hand and economic conservatism on the other hand, and that there might be some tension between those two types of conservatism and what I call constitutional conservatism, which focuses on the procedural and structural protections that limit the government's power to do us harm, to do us wrong. All of those things, I insist and I maintain, operate as part of a cohesive whole to help us build a better, stronger, more successful society, and a society in which there is likely to be much more upward mobility and much more prosperity across the board, if only we can capture and properly understand what it is that we're about as a movement and what it is that we seek to achieve as a movement. I'd also encourage you to reject the false narrative constantly delivered by the left. And the left has voices in every aspect of our society. It has a strong voice in both of our major political parties. It has a strong voice in our news media, in our entertainment media, in academia. In almost every aspect of our society, the left will tell you things that are not true. One of the things that they are likely to tell you is that conservatism is somehow fundamentally at odds with the needs of the little guy, the hardworking American, the common citizen, the mother, the father, who's just trying to provide for his or her family, just wants to provide for a better future for their children. That is a false narrative, and it must be rejected outright as false. And I want to talk to you today for a few minutes about how best we can reject that. We want to remember what it is that we're after. We're often fed the narrative that I just described, in part because the progressive vision is one that focuses on statism. It focuses on a big government, and the big government being the wellspring of all prosperity and equality and liberty. It is not. Once we properly understand that critical fact, we can move forward with an understanding of the fact that we're really in this, not as atomized individuals, not as separate islands unto ourselves. The message of conservatism is not you're all on your own. The message of conservatism, properly understood, is we're all in this together. Now, George W. Bush, a few years ago when he first started running for president, came up with a term that I didn't always like. The term was compassionate conservatism. The reason I was uncomfortable with that was that it somehow suggested that because he used those two terms together, it was almost as if to suggest that conservatism usually isn't compassionate, that there's something surprising or almost oxymoronic about the idea of compassionate conservatism. My belief is that this is not oxymoronic. It is instead redundant, because conservatism is compassion properly understood. We live in a society in which we understand that the best conditions in which human beings can exist is one in which we have two elements that are critical to who we are as Americans, to what any free society on earth will look like. The first is one that involves strong, robust institutions of civil society. Let me explain what I mean by that. You'll hear the term civil society a lot. Sometimes it's misused, sometimes it's simply underused or not used at all. The term civil society refers to the fact that most of what we do, most of who we are as human beings, most of the benefits that we enjoy exist and are experienced or acquired entirely outside of government. They exist first and foremost within the family, within religious organizations, within churches, synagogues, mosques, within private voluntary organizations of one sort or another, as communities, as members of the same faith or of similar faiths, and first and foremost as families. This is where we experience most of what is best in life. This is where we're in the best position to look out for our neighbor, to look out for our fellow beings, to make sure that human suffering doesn't go unaided. We have this affirmative obligation to our fellow beings, and it's important to remember that government can't create those strong institutions of civil society. It can't. If it ever tried, it would fail miserably. Government does, however, have the ability to destroy those, because when government gets too big, when it starts to provide all those things that are supposed to be provided by civil society, our institutions of civil society start to atrophy. They become weak, just as your leg would atrophy and become weak if you didn't use it for months because it was in a long cast. Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming, he's an orthopedic surgeon. He was just explaining this to me and Senator Heller on the Senate floor yesterday. So we can't overlook the fact that government presents a clear and present threat to strong institutions of civil society. It can destroy those institutions, and it cannot create them once they're destroyed. That's one of the reasons why we believe in the need for limited government, for constitutionally limited government, because it restricts the ability of government to weaken our institutions of civil society. The other key element to the kind of civilization that we want, that we need as conservatives, is a free market. We need the free market to be able to operate. We need the free market so that people can serve each other and so that people can prosper. Whether you're a for-profit business or whether you're a soup kitchen, your objective ultimately is to serve your fellow beings. If you want to sell Frisbees or serve soup to the homeless, you had better do it well, because in a free market economy, it's only those organizations that do things well that survive. And that's really what all of this is about, is serving one's fellow being, whether in a for-profit context or in some other context. Ultimately, the policies that we push for as conservatives need to be aimed at limiting the power of government, not necessarily because limited government is the end in and of itself. Limited government is important, but it's not the end. The end is this kind of civilization that I'm talking about, where we have upward mobility, where we have a strong ability to take care of the poor, the indigent, the oppressed, the otherwise afflicted, but where it's not government doing this, and where individuals have the ability to advance, to progress, to become more prosperous over time. Policies that we push for in this area will reflect three basic principles. Principles that I refer to using words that have, like so many things that are important to us, been co-opted by the progressive movement, by the far left. These principles are equality, diversity, and sustainability. But they don't necessarily mean the same things that you've often been told that they mean. Let's talk about equality first. Equality to conservatives doesn't refer to equality of outcomes. It refers to equality of opportunity. And it refers to the fact that we are all subject to a law or a system of laws that judges us fairly and impartially. So equality is something that, if we properly understand, will make us free, more free, and not less free. It's important to remember in this context that we may be equal in that the law makes us equally free, but we will never be free simply because we are equal, especially if it's the government that's forcing inequality of our outcomes. Diversity. Diversity is another concept that's often commandeered by the left, by the far left progressives in our country. What diversity properly understood to us, I think, means that we want as many people to get as much out of life as they want. And particularly as it relates to government, we want as many people to have the kind of government they want as possible. Our Constitution actually builds diversity into the system. It's part of the original design of our almost 226-year-old founding document that I personally believe was written by men, wise men who were raised up by God to that very purpose. That Constitution made clear that most powers would be reserved to the states. And what that means is that if people in Vermont want to have a single-payer, government-funded, government-run health care system, they may do it. But they must do it on a state or a local level, not on a national level. If the people of Vermont want that, let them knock themselves out. It's one of the reasons I'm not likely to move to Vermont. But the point is that more people in more parts of the country would get more of what they want out of government and less of what they don't want out of government if we started to respect, once again, this principle of federalism, that in each region of the country there are significant geographic and cultural differences. Those differences are going to lead people in those parts of the country to choose different forms of government. As long as they choose a Republican form of government, the Constitution will have no hold on that, as long as they're not otherwise violating some constitutionally protected right that is enjoyed by all Americans generally. Sustainability, another term often used by the far left, another term that we need to recapture. Sustainability to conservatives ultimately means that we need to make sure that whatever government programs we do choose, that we see to it that government performs functions within those areas well, that we make them sustainable, that we make clear that we can afford in the long term what it is that we're doing. So if we decide, as I think we should decide, that we want to continue to have the military power necessary to protect American citizens, to make sure that we protect the greatest civilization the world has ever known, we'd better make sure that we have the budgetary wherewithal to do that, not just this year and next year, but moving forward in the long run as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.